Hey everybody, today we're going to be doing something different, and this is going to be a start of a new series, kind of like a book club, where I'm going to read to you a book. We're going to start off with the first of a six book series, and it's called Cirque Du Freak, and it's by Darren Shan. I read the first two, I think, in primary school. I was in P6, so I would have been about 9, and our teacher read them, and I really enjoyed them, despite it not being like a genre that I would normally have read back then. So it is an easy book, and I would say it's easy to follow along with as well. But let's read the blurb, shall we? The Saga of Darren Shan, Book 1, Cirque Du Freak. Darren Shan is just an ordinary schoolboy until he gets an invitation to visit the Cirque Du Freak, until he meets Madame Octa, until he comes face to face with a creature of the night. Soon Darren and his friend Steve are caught in a deadly trap. Darren must make a bargain with the one person who can save Steve, but that person is not human and only deals in blood. Cirque Du Freak. So we're just going to read the first few chapters tonight, and we are joined by Lottie, and actually she's often in my videos. She may not be in the camera, but she usually somehow makes her presence known. Okay, so what is it? You can stop looking at me. Oh yes, good. Okay. Chapter 1. I was in the toilet at school, sitting down, humming a song. I had my trousers on. I'd come in near the end of English class, feeling sick. My teacher, Mr. Dalton, is great about things like that. He's smart and knows when you're faking and when you're being serious. He took one look at me when I raised my hand and said I was ill, then nodded his head and told me to make for the toilet. Throw up whatever's bugging you, Darren, he said. Then get your behind back in here. I wish every teacher was as understanding as Mr. Dalton. In the end, I didn't get sick, but still felt queasy, so I stayed on in the toilet. I heard the bell ring for the end of class, and everybody came rushing out on their lunch break. I wanted to join them, but I knew Mr. Dalton would give out if he saw me in the yard so soon. He doesn't get mad if you trick him, but he goes quiet and won't speak to you for ages, and that's almost worse than being shouted at. So there I was, humming, watching my watch, waiting. Then I heard somebody calling my name. Darren, hey, Darren, have you fallen in or what? I grinned. It was Steve Leopard, my best friend. Steve's real surname was Leonard, but everybody called him Steve Leopard, and not just because the names sounded alike. Steve used to be what my mum calls a wild child. He raised hell wherever he went, got into fights, stolen shops. One day, he was still in a pushchair. He found a sharp stick and prodded passing women with it. No prizes for guessing where he stuck it. He was feared and despised everywhere he went, but not by me. I've been his best friend since Montessori. When we first met, my mum says I was drawn to his wildness, but I just thought he was a great guy to be with. He had a fierce temper and threw scary tantrums when he lost it. But I simply ran away when that happened and came back again once he'd calmed down. Steve's reputation had softened over the years. His mum took him to see a lot of good counsellors who taught him how to control himself. But he was still a minor legend in the schoolyard, and not just someone you messed with, even if you were bigger and older than him. "Hey, Steve," I called back, "I'm in here." I hit the door so he knew which one I was behind. He hurried over and I opened the door. He smiled when he saw me sitting down with my trousers on. "Did you puke?" he asked. "No," I said. "Do you think you're gonna?" "Maybe," I said. Then I leaned forward all of a sudden and made a sick noise. Bleh. But Steve Leopard knew me too well to be fooled. "Give my boots a polish whilst you're down there," he said, and laughed when I pretended to spit on his shoes and rub them with a sheet of toilet paper. "Did I miss anything in class?" I asked, sitting up. "Nah," he said, "just the usual crap." "Did you get your history homework?" I asked. "It doesn't have to be done until tomorrow, does it?" he asked, getting worried. Steve's always forgetting about homework. "The day after tomorrow," I told him. "Oh," he said, relaxing. "Even better," I thought. He stopped and frowned. "Hold on," he said. "Tomorrow's Thursday. The day after tomorrow would be..." "Got you!" I yelled, punching him on the shoulder. "Ow!" he shouted. "That hurt." He rubbed his arm, but I could tell he wasn't really hurt. "Are you coming out?" he asked then. "I thought I'd stay in here and admire the view," I said, leaning back on the toilet seat. "Quit messing," he said. "We were 5-1 down when I came in. We're probably 6-7 down now. We need you." He was talking about football. "We play a game every lunchtime. My team normally wins, but we lost a lot of our best players. Dave Morgan broke his leg, Sam White transferred to another school, and when his family moved, and Danny Curtin had stopped playing football in order to spend lunch hanging out with Sheila Lee, the girl he fancies. Idiot. I'm our best full forward. There are better defenders and midfielders, and Tommy Jones is the best goalkeeper in the whole school. But I'm the only one who can stand up front and score 4 or 5 times a day without a fail." "Okay," I said, standing. "I'll save you. I've scored a hat-trick every day this week. It would be a pity to stop me now." We passed the older guys smoking around the sinks as usual and hurried to my locker so I could get changed into my trainers. I used to have a great pair, which I won in a writing competition, but the laces snapped a few months ago, and the rubber along the sides started to fall off. And then my feet grew. The pair I have now are okay, but they're not the same. We were 8-3 down when I got on the pitch. It wasn't real pitch, just a long stretch of yard with painted goalposts at either end. Whoever painted them was a right idiot. He put the crossbar too high at one end and too low at the other. "Never feel, Hotshot Shan is here," I shouted as I ran onto the pitch. A lot of players laughed and groaned, but I could see my teammates picking up it, and our opponents growing worried. I made a great start and scored 2 goals inside a minute. It looked like we might come back to draw or win, but time ran out. If I'd arrived earlier, we'd have been okay, but the bell rang just as I was hitting my stride, so we lost 9-7. As we were leaving the pitch, Alan Morris ran into the yard, panting and red-faced. They're my 3 best friends, Steve Leopard, Tommy Jones and Alan Morris. We must be the oddest 4 people in the whole world because only one of us, Steve, has a nickname. "Look what I found," Alan yelled, waving a soggy piece of paper around under our noses. "What is it?" Tommy asked, trying to grab it. "It's..." Alan began, but stopped when Mr. Dalton shouted at us. "You 4, inside," he roared. "We're coming, Mr. Dalton," Steve roared back. Steve is Mr. Dalton's favourite and gets away with all the stuff the rest of us couldn't do. Like when he uses swear words sometimes in his stories. If I put in some of the words Steve has, I'd have been kicked out long ago. But Mr. Dalton has a soft spot for Steve because he's special. Sometimes he's brilliant in class and gets everything right, while other times he can't even spell his own name. Mr. Dalton says he's a bit of an idiot savant, which means he's a stupid genius. Anyways, even though he's Mr. Dalton's pet, not even Steve can get away with turning up late for class, so whatever Alan had, it would have to wait. We trudged back to the class, sweaty and tired, after the game, and began our next lesson. Little did I know that Alan's mysterious piece of paper was to change my life forever. For the worse. Chapter 2. We had Mr. Dalton again after lunch for history. We were studying World War II. I wasn't too keen on it, but Steve thought it was great. He loved anything to do with killing and war. He often said he wanted to be a mercenary soldier, one who fights for money, when he grew up, and he meant it. We had mass after lunch, and incredibly, Mr. Dalton for a third time. Our usual maths teacher was off sick, so others had been filling in for him as best as they could all day. Steve was in 7th heaven, his favourite teacher, 3 classes in a row. It was the first time we'd have Mr. Dalton for maths, so Steve started showing off, telling him where we were in the book, explaining some of the trickier problems as though speaking to a child. Mr. Dalton didn't mind. He was used to Steve and knew exactly how to handle him. Normally, Mr. Dalton runs a tight ship. His classes are fun, but we always come out of them having learned something. But he wasn't very good at maths. He tried hard, but we could tell he was in over his head. And while he was busy trying to come to grips with things, his head buried in the maths books, Steve by his side making helpful suggestions. The rest of us began to fidget and talk softly to each other and pass notes around. I sent a note to Alan asking to see the mysterious piece of paper he'd brought in. He refused at first to pass it around, but I kept sending notes and finally he gave in. Tommy sits just 2 seats over from him, so he got it first. He opened it up and began studying it. His face lit up when he was reading, and his jaw slowly dropped. When he passed it to me, having read it 3 times, I soon saw why. It was a flyer, an advertising pamphlet for some sort of travelling circus. There was a picture of a wolf's head on the top. The wolf had its mouth open and saliva was dripping from its teeth. At the bottom were pictures of a spider and a snake, and they looked vicious too. Just beneath the wolf, in big red capital letters, were the word Cirque Du Freak. Underneath that, in smaller writing, for 1 week only, Cirque Du Freak. See Steve the Syriza, the Twisting Twins, the Snake Boy, the Wolfman, Gerther Teeth, Lartin Crepsley and his performing spider, Madame Octa, Alexandra Ribs, the Bearded Lady, Hans, Ramis Twobblies, World's Fattest Man. Beneath all that was an address where you could buy tickets and find out where the show was playing, and right at the bottom, just above the pictures of the snake and the spider. Not for the faint-hearted. Certain reservations applies. Cirque du Freak, I muttered softly to myself. Cirque was French for circus. Circus of Freaks. Was this a freak show? It looked like it. I began reading the flyer again, immersed in the drawings and descriptions of the performers. In fact, I was so immersed I forgot about Mr. Dalton. I only remembered him when I realised the room was silent. I looked up and saw Steve standing alone at the head of the class. He stuck out his tongue at me and grinned. Feeling the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, I stared over my shoulder, and there was Mr. Dalton standing behind me reading the flyer, lips tight. "What is this?" he snapped, snatching the paper from my hands. "It's an advert, sir," I answered. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. He looked really angry. I'd never seen him this worked up. "Where'd you get it?" he asked again. I licked my lips nervously. I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't going to drop Alan in the soup, and I knew he wouldn't know it by himself. Even Alan's best friend knows he's not the bravest in the world, but my mind was stuck in low gear and I couldn't think of a reasonable lie. Luckily, Steve stepped in. "Sir, it's mine," he said. "Yours?" Mr. Dalton blinked slowly. "I found it near the bus stop, sir," Steve said. "Some old guy threw it away. I thought it looked interesting, so I picked it up. I was going to ask you about it later at the end of class." "Oh." Mr. Dalton tried not to look flattered, but I could tell he was. "That's different. Nothing wrong with an inquisitive mind. Sit down, Steve." Steve said. Mr. Dalton stuck a bit of a blue tack on the flyer and pinned it to the blackboard. Long ago, he said, tapping the flyer, there used to be real freak shows. Greedy con men crammed malformed people in cages and... Sir, what's malformed mean? Somebody asked. Someone who doesn't look ordinary, Mr. Dalton said. A person with 3 arms or 2 noses, somebody with no legs. Somebody very short or very tall. The comment put these poor people, who were no different to you or me, except in looks, on display and called them freaks. They charged the public to stare at them and invite them to laugh and to tease. They treated these so-called freaks like animals, paid them little, beat them, dressed them in rags, never allowed them to wash. That's cruel, sir, Delaney Price, a girl near the front, said. Yes, he agreed. Freak shows were cruel, monstrous creations. That's why I got angry when I saw this. He tore down the flyer. That they were banned years ago. But every so often you'll hear a rumour that they're still going strong. Do you think Cirque Du Freak is a real freak show? I asked. Mr. Dalton studied the flyer again, then shook his head. I doubt it, he said. Probably just a cruel hoax. Still, he added, if it was real, I hope nobody in here would dream of going. Oh no, sir, we all said quickly. Because freak shows were terrible, he said. They pretended to be like proper circuses, but they were cesspits of evil. Anybody who went to one would be just as bad as the people running it. You'd have to be really twisted to want to go to one of those, sir, Steve agreed. And then he looked at me, winked, and mouthed the words, we're going. Chapter 3. Steve persuaded Mr. Dalton to let him keep the flyer. He said he wanted it for his bedroom wall. Mr. Dalton wasn't going to give it to him, but then he changed his mind. He cut off the address at the bottom before handing it over. After school, the 4 of us, me, Steve, Alan Morris and Tommy Jones, gathered in the yard and studied the glossy flyer. It's got to be fake, I said. Why? Alan asked. They don't allow freak shows anymore, I told him. Wolfmen and snake boys were outlawed years ago. Mr. Dalton said so. It's not fake, Alan insisted. Where'd you get it? Tommy asked. I stole it, Alan said softly. It belongs to my big brother. Alan's big brother was Tony Morris, who used to be the school's biggest bully until he got thrown out. He's huge and mean and ugly. You stole from Tony? I gasped. Have you got a death wish? He won't know it was me, Alan said. He had it in a pair of trousers that Mum threw in the washing machine. I stuck a bit of blank piece of paper in when I took this out. He'll think that the ink got washed off. Smart, Steve nodded. Where did Tony get it? I asked. There was a guy passing him out in an alley, Alan said. One of the circus performers, a Mr. Crepsley. The one with the spider? Tommy asked. Yeah, Alan answered. Only he didn't have the spider with him. It was a night, and Tony was on his way back from the pub. Tony's not old enough to get served in a pub, but he hangs around with older guys who buy drinks for him. Mr. Crepsley handed the paper to Tony and told him they're a travelling freak show who put on secret performances in towns and cities across the world. He said you had to have a flyer to buy tickets, and they only give them to people they trust. You're not supposed to tell anyone else about the show. I only found out because Tony was in high spirits, the way he gets when he drinks, and couldn't keep his mouth shut. How much are the tickets? Steve asked. £15 each, Alan said. £15? We all shouted. Nobody's going to pay £15 to see a bunch of freaks, Steve started. I would, I said. Me too, Tommy agreed. And me, Alan added. Sure, Steve said, but we don't have £15 to throw away, so it's academic, isn't it? What does academic mean? Alan asked. It means we can't afford the tickets, so it doesn't matter if we would buy them or not. Steve explained. It's easy to say you would buy something if you know you can't. How much do we have? Alan asked. 2 pence a penny, I laughed. It was something my dad often said. I'd love to go, Tommy said sadly. It sounds great. He studied the picture again. Mr. Dalton didn't think too much of it, Alan said. That's what I mean, Tommy said. If Sir doesn't like it, it must be super. Anything that adults hate is normally brilliant. Are we sure we don't have enough? I asked. Maybe they have discounts for children. I don't think children are allowed in, Alan said, but he told me how much he had anyway. £5.70. I've got £12 exactly, Steve said. I have £6.85, Tommy said, and I have £8.25, I told them. That's more than £30 in all, I said, adding it up in my head. We get our pocket money tomorrow. If we pull our... but the tickets are nearly sold out, Alan interrupted. The first show was yesterday. It finishes Tuesday. If we go, it'll have to be tomorrow night or Saturday because our parents won't let us out any other night. The guy who gave Tony the flyer said the tickets for both those nights were almost gone. We'd have to buy them tonight. Well, so much for that, I said, putting on a brave face. Maybe not, Steve said. My mum keeps a wad of money in a jar at home. I could borrow some and put it back when we get our pocket money. You mean steal? I asked. I mean borrow, he snapped. It's only stealing if you don't put it back. What do you say? How would we buy the tickets? Tommy asked. It's a school night. We wouldn't be let out. I can sneak out, Steve said. I'll buy them. But Mr. Dalton snipped off their dress, I reminded him. How will you know where to go? I memorised it, he grinned. Now, are we going to stand here all night making up excuses, or are we going to go for it? We looked at each other, then one by one nodded silently. Right, Steve said. We hurry home, grab our money, and meet back here. Tell your parents you forgot a book or something. We'll lump the money together, and I'll add the rest from the pot at home. What if you can't steal? Borrow the money, I asked. He shrugged. Then the deal's off. But we won't know unless we try. Now hurry. With that, he sprinted away. Moments later, making up our minds, Tommy, Alan, and me ran too. Chapter 4. The freak show was all I could think about that night. I tried forgetting about it, but not even when I was watching my favourite TV shows. It sounded so weird. A snake boy, a wolf man, a performance spider. I was especially excited by the spider. Mum and Dad didn't notice anything was up, but Annie did. Annie is my younger sister. She can be a bit annoying, but most of the time she's cool. She doesn't run to Mum telling tales if I misbehave, and she knows how to keep a secret. What's wrong with you? She asked after dinner. We were alone in the kitchen washing up. Nothing's wrong, I said. Yes, there is, she said. You've been behaving funny all night. I knew she'd keep asking until she got the truth. So I told her about the freak show. It sounds great, she agreed. But there's no way you get in. Why not? I asked. I bet they don't let children in. It sounds like a grown-up sort of show. They probably won't let a brat like you in, I said nastily. But me and the others would be okay. That upset her, so I apologised. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't mean that. I'm just annoyed because you're probably right, Annie. I'll give anything to go. I've got a makeup kit I could lend you, she said. You can draw on wrinkles and stuff. It'd make you look older. I smiled and gave her a big hug, which is something I don't do very often. Thanks, sis, I said. But it's okay. If we get in, we get in. If we don't, we don't. We didn't see much after that. We finished crying and hurried into their TV room. Dad got back home a few minutes later. He works on building sites all over the place, so he's often late. He's grumpy sometimes, but was in a good mood that night and swung Annie around in a circle. Anything exciting happened today? He asked, as if after he say hello to Mum and give her a kiss. I scored another hat trick at lunch, I told him. Really? He said. That's great, well done. We turned the TV down while Dad was eating. He likes peace and quiet when he eats, and often asks us questions or tells us about his day at work. Later, Mum went to her room to work on her stamp albums. She's a serious stamp collector. I used to collect too when I was younger and more easily amused. I popped up to see if she had any new stamps with exotic animals or spiders on them. She hadn't. While I was there, I sounded her out about freak shows. "Mum," I said, "have you ever been to a freak show?" "A what?" she asked, concentrating on the stamps. "A freak show," I repeated, "with bearded ladies and wolfmen and snake boys." She looked up at me and blinked. "A snake boy?" she asked. "What on earth is a snake boy?" I stopped when I realised I didn't know. "Well, that doesn't matter," I said. "Have you ever been to one?" She shook her head. "No, they're illegal." "If they weren't," I said, "and one came to town, would you go?" "No," she said, shivering. "Those sort of things frighten me. Besides, I don't think it would be fair on the people in the show." "What do you mean?" I asked. "How would you like it," she said, "if you were stuck in a cage for people to look at?" "I'm not a freak," I said huffily. "I know," she laughed and kissed on the top of my head. "You're my little angel." "Mom, don't," I grumbled, wiping my forehead with my hand. "Silly," she smiled. "But imagine you had 2 heads or 4 arms and somebody stuck you on show for people to make fun of. You wouldn't like it, would you?" "No," I said, shuffling my feet. "Anyways, what's all this about for freak show?" she asked. "Have you been staying up late watching horror films?" "No," I said. "Because you know your dad doesn't like you watching." "I wasn't staying up late, okay?" I shouted. It's really annoying when parents don't listen. "Okay, Mr. Grumpy," she said. "No need to shout. If you don't like my company, go downstairs and help your father with the garden." I didn't want to go, but Mum was upset that I shouted at her, so I left her and went down to the kitchen. Dad was coming in from the back and spotted me. "So this is where you've been hiding," he chuckled. "Too busy to help the old man tonight?" "I was on my way," I told him. "Too late," he said, taking off his wellies. "I'm finished." I watched him putting on his slippers. He had huge feet. He takes size 12 shoes. When I was younger, he used to stand me on his feet and walk me around. It was like being on 2 long skateboards. "What are you doing now?" I asked. "Writing," he said. My dad has pen pals all over the world, in America, Australia, Russia and China. He says he likes to keep in touch with his global neighbours, but I think it's just an excuse to go into the study for a nap. Annie was playing with dolls and stuff. I asked if she wanted to come into my room for a game of bed tennis using a sock for a ball and shoes for rackets, but she was too busy arranging her dolls for a pretend picnic. I went to my room and dragged down my comics. I have loads of cool comics. Superman, Batman, Spider-Man and Spawn. Spawn's my favourite. He's a superhero who used to be a demon in hell. Some of my Spawn comics are quite scary, but that's why I love them. I spent the rest of the night reading comics and putting them in order. I used to swap with Tommy, who has a huge collection, but he kept spilling drinks on the covers and crumbs between the pages, so I stopped. Most nights I go to bed by 10, but Mum and Dad forgot about me and I stayed up till nearly 10:30. Then Dad saw the light in my room and came up. He pretended to be cross, but really he wasn't. Dad doesn't mind too much if I stay up late. Mum's the one who nags me about it. "Bed," he said, "or I'll never be able to wake you up in the morning." "Just a minute, Dad," I told him, while I put my comics away and brushed my teeth. "Okay," he said, "but make it quick." I stuck the comic into their box and stuffed it back onto the shelf above my bed. I put on my pyjamas and went to brush my teeth. I took my time, brushed slowly, and it was almost 11 when I got into bed. I lay back smiling. I felt very tired and knew I'd fall asleep in a couple of seconds. The last thing I thought about was the Cirque Du Freak. I wondered what a snake boy looked like, and how long the bearded lady's beard was, and what hands and girth her teeth did. Most of all, I dreamed about the spider. next morning, Tommy, Alan and me waited outside the gates for Steve, but there was no sign of him by the time the bell rang for class, so we had to go in. I bet he's Dawson, Tommy said. He couldn't get the tickets and now he doesn't want to face us. Steve's not like that, I said. I hope he brings the flyer back, Alan said. Even if we can't go, I'd like to have the flyer. I'd stick it up over my bed and... You couldn't stick it up, stupid, Tommy laughed. Why not? Alan asked. Because Tony would see it, I said. Oh yeah, Alan said glumly. I was miserable in class. We had geography first, and every time Mrs. Quinn asked me a question, I got it wrong. Normally, geography is my best subject. I know so much about it from when I used to collect stamps. Had a late night, Darren? She asked when I got 5th question wrong. No, Mrs. Quinn, I lied. I think you did, she smiled. There are more bags under your eyes than in a local supermarket. Everybody laughed at that. Mrs. Quinn didn't crack jokes very often, and I did too, even though I was the butt of the joke. This morning dragged the way it does when you feel let down or disappointed. I spent the time imagining the freak show. I made believe I was one of the freaks and the owner of the circus was a nasty guy who whipped everybody. Even when they got stuff right, all the freaks hated him, but he was so big and mean nobody said anything. Until one day he whipped me once too often and I turned into a wolf and bit his head off. Everybody cheered and I was the new owner. It was a pretty good daydream. Then, a few minutes before break, the door opened and guess who walked in? Steve. His mother was behind him, and she said something to Mrs. Quinn, who nodded and smiled. Then Mrs. Leonard left and Steve strolled over to his seat and sat down. Where were you? I asked in a furious whisper. At the dentist, he said. I forgot to tell you I was going. What about? That's enough, Darren, Mrs. Quinn said. I shut up instantly. At break, Tommy, Alan and me almost smothered Steve. We were shouting and pulling at him at the same time. Did you get the tickets? I asked. Were you really at the dentist's? Tommy wanted to know. Where's my flyer? Alan asked. Patience, boys, patience, Steve said, pushing us away and laughing. All good things come to those who wait. Come on, Steve. Don't mess with us. Don't mess us around, I told him. Did you get them or not? Yes and no, he said. What does that mean? Tommy snorted. It means I have some good news, some bad news, and some crazy news. Which do you want to hear first? Crazy news? I asked, puzzled. Steve pulled us off to one side of the yard, checked to make sure no one was about, and began speaking in a whisper. I got the money, he said, and sneaked out at 7 o'clock when Mum was on the phone. I hurried across town to the ticket booth. But do you know who was there when I arrived? Who? We asked. Mr. Dalton, he said. He was there with a couple of policemen. They were dragging a small guy out of the booth. It was only a small shed, really. When suddenly there was a huge bang and a great cloud of smoke covered them all. When it cleared, the small guy had disappeared. What did Mr. Dalton and the police do? Alan asked. Examined the shed, looked around a bit, then left. They didn't see you? Tommy asked. No, Steve said. I was well hidden. So, you didn't get the tickets, I asked sadly. I didn't say that, he contradicted me. You got them? I gasped. I turned to leave, he said, and found the small guy behind me. He was tiny and dressed in a long cloak which covered him from head to toe. He spotted the flyer in my hand, took it, and held out the tickets. I handed him over the money and... You got them, we roared delightfully. Yes, he beamed, and his face fell. But there was a catch. I told you there was bad news, remember? What is it? I asked, thinking he'd lost him. He only sold me 2, Steve said. I had the money for 4, but he wouldn't take it. He didn't say anything, just tapped the bit on the flyer about certain reservations, then handed me a card which said Cirque Du Freak only sold 2 tickets per flyer. I offered him extra money. I had nearly £70 in total, but he wouldn't accept it. He only sold you 2, 2 tickets? Tommy asked his maid. But that means, Alan began. Only 2 of us can go, Steve finished. He looked around at us grimly. 2 of us will have to stay at home. Okay, we're going to leave that there for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the first 5 chapters of Cirque Du Freak by Darren Shan. If you liked this, give this video a thumbs up and it lets me know the kind of content that you do enjoy seeing from myself on this channel. Let me know in the comments if this is something you'd like to see more often, and let me know if you've ever read a Darren Shan book or what is your take on freak shows. Hopefully you have a good evening or a good night or a good day wherever it is in the world that you are.